Welcome to Family Group Night with St. Gerard House. We are happy to introduce Penny Williams. She does incredible work. In case you did not get a chance to click on the link we sent out with a reminder, please do so. And we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the invite. And I am always super excited to talk about autism and ADHD and parenting. So a lot to talk about with executive functioning. Of course, we will never be able to cover all of it, but I love that we went through the group and we know kind of what you are looking to learn and what challenges and barriers you're having in your own families, so that I can kind of customize a little bit and make sure we touch on those things. First, I just wanted to start by saying that I am one of you. I do this work because I have a now 17-year-old son who was first diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 6 and then was diagnosed on the spectrum at age 12. So his autism was very hidden for a long time. And once he started to get older and the social skills had more of a burden, flexibility was needed more, then those autism symptoms really started coming forward. And we realized that there had to be something else going on besides just ADHD. And so I started just by blogging, and then I wrote books, and now I have parenting courses and coaching I do privately with parents as well. And I am here in the area. I don't know how far St. Gerard House spreads, but I am here in South Asheville as well. So probably a lot of us are in close proximity. I want to start our conversation on executive functioning by playing a short 5-minute video for you from Harvard, actually, their Child Development Center. It's a really short, really concise explanation of what executive functioning is and the different ways that you might see it come forth, those challenges within your child. So let me share my screen. Give me just a second and we will play that for everyone.
Building core capabilities for life. Every day we take on the ordinary, sometimes challenging tasks of work, school, parenting, relationships, and just managing our busy lives. How do we navigate these tasks successfully? And what can send us off course? Science offers an explanation. We all need a set of core capabilities that we can develop with practice over time. Scientists call them executive function or self-regulation skills, and they help us to focus on what's important, to plan ahead, set goals, and meet them. They help us deal with whatever life throws at us and still keep heading where we need to go. They help us resist impulsive behaviors.
Hey, stop.
And change course when we need to. No one is born with executive function skills, but everyone can build them. We build them through a lifetime of making connections within and among the regions of the brain. Our brains begin life with billions of neurons, rapidly connecting to each other as we experience the world around us, making trillions of connections in just a few years. Early simple circuits form a foundation that more complex circuits and skills build on as we grow and have new experiences. These complex circuits, built throughout childhood and reaching across vast regions of the brain, make our core capabilities possible. The more we use these connections, the stronger and faster they become. That's why practice is so important. When we are children, we practice these skills by playing games, learning teamwork, adjusting to new rules. We continue to develop these skills in adolescence by managing school and other things like work, sports, music, and relationships. When we practice executive function skills, circuits rapidly connect the prefrontal cortex to other parts of the brain. These circuits act like an air traffic control system in the brain. They manage incoming information and help us respond with intention, not on impulse. Threatening or stressful experiences activate different circuits, and those trigger automatic responses: fight, flight, or freeze. We need automatic responses for survival, but if stress is constant, these automatic fight or flight circuits become stronger and faster than our more productive intentional circuits, the ones we use for executive function and self-regulation. For anyone under stress, it's hard to call on intentional skills. If we've been experiencing serious stress from our earliest years, the stress caused by poverty, violence, or addiction, a chaotic environment, it's even harder. Under lots of stress every day, it's harder still. The key is counterbalancing those automatic responses by building up our intentional ones, by building strong executive function skills. The good news is these core capabilities can be strengthened. How? By redesigning our systems so they reduce the sources of stress in people's lives, by simplifying how services are provided to families, helping them meet basic needs and building on strengths. Because small successes lead to bigger ones. With less stress, we can practice the skills we already have and build new circuits for the intentional responses we need. Stronger brain circuits are built through practice in situations that matter. That's true for children, it's true for adolescents, and it's true for adults. Helping children build skills gives them a strong foundation for all that comes later. Helping teens build their skills propels them into greater success as adults and parents. And helping adult caregivers build their core capabilities ensures success at work, stable homes, and responsive relationships for the next generation. When our communities work together to help children and adults build these skills, we create a positive cycle as one generation passes them on to the next. And that helps us all.
Okay, I hope everybody was able to see and hear that. Just a really good explanation to start off with kind of the brain science. And I know a lot of us tend to not ignore the science, but it tends to be complicated. And so we might kind of avoid the scientific perspective. But what's really important here is that executive functioning is part of our children's brains. And they might have a poor executive functioning skill or several, and it could be due to development, lagging skills. You know, a lot of these things are true of kids and adults with autism. And by understanding the brain science behind it, you can really understand what's happening when poor executive functioning skills start to look like poor behavior, when they start to be something that is really unwanted, a behavior that you want to change. And knowing first that it's an executive functioning skill or challenge, and then knowing second that it's part of your child's physiology, at least today, while they haven't yet built that skill more, excuse me, I find that that really helps a lot of parents, myself included, to be able to kind of step back, stay calm, and really recognize what is triggering behavior and being able to help instead of just reacting. We want to respond. So I find that it's always good to kind of have that science conversation at the beginning, because having more understanding of the reasons that our kids or our young adult kids are acting in particular ways can really help us to help them. And that's all that any of us want to do, is to help our kids succeed. I want to first talk a little bit about what are executive functions. So many people don't know what they are, and a lot of people in our kids' lives have not even ever heard the term executive functioning. A couple of years ago, my son, early in high school, had a special ed teacher who had never heard the term, and she was in her 25th year of teaching special ed. So this is something that not a lot of teachers or other adults in your kids' lives really understand. So the more you understand it, the better you can help facilitate between these other people and your child, good interactions. So executive functions are really life tasks. They could be getting ready for school, getting ready for bed, completing your homework, turning in your homework, managing a long, drawn out school project, even like feeding the dog or the family pet, cleaning your room, organizing your stuff. All of these things might be issues that you're seeing with your kids, and they're all signals that in some way they're either lagging behind or they have a deficit in one or more executive functioning skills. Those skills specifically are planning and organization. What we mean by that is sequencing of tasks, organizing your stuff, your belongings, your backpack, having a place where you put certain items away so that you can find them later. Also, chunking projects into smaller tasks. So all of those things are falling in under planning and organization. If you have a child who is somewhat deficient or lagging in that area, they are going to struggle with all of those planning and organization tasks, which, if you think about it, affects a great deal of their day. I mean, basically, executive functioning is how we control our lives and function within life day to day, and it comes into play so often. It's very, very big part of our lives. The second area of executive functioning skills is working memory. I know at least one parent had brought up working memory as an issue. And that one I find to be one of the bigger challenges with executive functioning. We'll talk more about it, but there are some ways that you can work on building that skill, but a lot of it has to do with the difference in neurology and the difference in their brains. Time management and a sense of time is the third of the executive functioning skills. A lot of people with poor executive functioning actually have what a lot of people refer to as time blindness. So just this really poor sense of even how long a task can take. And I have a great story about challenging time blindness that I'll share in a few minutes. And there are lots of tools and strategies that we can use to work on that, and we'll talk about those more as well. The fourth piece of executive functioning is task initiation, getting started. There's a difference between knowing what to do and being able to engage and start to do it. And that I find is a really big issue for a lot of our kids. Spectrum, ADHD, even anxiety, because they're starting to get so overwhelmed in their autonomic nervous system that these skills take a back seat. Even when they have some of them, they're getting overwhelmed by emotion. They're getting overwhelmed by maybe distraction, anxiety, stress, as was mentioned in the video. Number 5 is transitioning. And what we mean by that is switching gears. So if your child is playing on the iPad and you're asking them to stop and come to dinner, and that is a really difficult transition, there's some executive functioning challenge or deficit going on there that is creating that difficulty. And we'll talk more again about what you can do to help with that. Emotional regulation. This is something that a lot of people don't even realize is part of executive functioning. And so many of our kids really struggle with emotions in different ways. It could be the way they react and respond to certain things. It could be the way they react to making a mistake. A lot of kids are often perfectionists, and that creates a lot of emotional struggle and a sense of a lack of control, that they can't really ever meet their own expectations of themselves. And then a resilience or a lack of resilience also falls into that emotional regulation piece, as well as emotional communication. I know for my own son, he really struggled with the kind of nuances of feelings. He got that there was anger, there was sadness, there was happiness, but he wasn't seeing all of the spectrum and the different ways that each of those emotions kind of present. And so if he was frustrated, angry, even just slightly irritated, he only had one reaction, no matter the scale of his feelings. And so we had to work on the different feelings and how we are going to communicate how we're feeling to others, which then helps others to help us. All of that is still part of executive functioning. Self-monitoring is a big one. That's your focusing of attention, juggling multiple tasks, relationships, even your social interactions. You need to, in a social circumstance, be able to recognize signals that you're getting from other people and react to them. And that is self-monitoring. And that is often an issue, a challenge for kids on the spectrum. And the last piece of executive functioning skills is flexible thinking. And this is a big one that's really common for a lot of us too. Maybe only seeing one way something can happen. If you have maybe a play date with a friend to meet at the swimming pool and go swimming, and it has to be postponed or delayed, and your child completely melts down, it's because they don't have as good of a kind of flexible thinking muscle to be able to think through the fact that there could be tomorrow. You're not going to not do it forever. You're just putting it off. And that, again, it goes with the time blindness as well, and poor time management, because if they don't have a sense of how long it is until tomorrow, it's just forever. You know, we have a saying with ADHD, it's either now or not now. There's no kind of in between there in recognition of that. And so there are a lot of things that we can do to really help kids to either build these lagging skills or have strategies and tools to work around those deficits and still succeed. Some ways that you might be seeing poor executive functioning show up in your home or in the classroom. Your child might always lose their belongings. They can't ever find their phone or their shoes or their backpack. Their bedroom might look like a tornado hit it. And when you say clean your room, they think it's clean. They don't see it, which is totally my kid. A messy backpack, lots of papers stuffed in the bottom, nothing's organized. They might rarely or ever be, or if ever, be on time. They might have trouble following directions and completing multi-step directions. And this is a big one that I want to be sure that we talk about some strategies for too, because a lot of kids, especially with that working memory struggle, they can't hold a 3-part instruction in their heads in order to complete it fully. So they feel like they're complete because they can't remember the rest of it. And you go back and you say, but I told you to do this other thing too. Why didn't you listen? And it wasn't that they didn't listen. It was that their brain couldn't hold it all and keep it sequenced until they finished. And again, that just shows how when you understand what's really happening, it makes it a lot easier to have an appropriate response to your child in those times. So let's talk about some tools and strategies that you can use for some of these different challenges. The biggest one for executive functioning as a whole is structure and routine. We need to create the structure, almost a scaffolding for our kids, so that there isn't any question about what should I be doing, or when do we, go to the pool in the summer during the week? When do we go to school, or what time am I going to get to come home from school? So anything that you can make very routine. If you go swimming once a week, do it the same day at roughly the same time every week. They know what to expect then. They're not kind of floundering around with, I don't know what time it's going to happen. I'm going to ask mom every 2 minutes until it comes. I think it's forever. They automatically know when things are coming, and you want to schedule with them. I always recommend for families to have a family calendar, like wall size, that you can put on the wall with an area for each person in the family. And that way your kids can go to that and they can see when something's coming up. They can see when mom or dad might not be home with them if somebody is traveling or going to be away for work. They can see when there's something new on the calendar that doesn't usually happen, like a doctor's appointment, or an after school trip or activity with the school. Anything that's not routine can easily knock them off their foundations because of these lagging skills, to then say, okay, I have to do this thing, and now I have to understand the time, and I have to think about, what I have to do. I might have to plan and organize some. If I'm going to the doctor's office, I have to know that first I have to sit in the waiting room for a certain amount of time. Then we see the doctor. There's always kind of a system, a routine of steps to everything that we do. Nothing is just one step. No task is just one step to our brains. A really good example of this is taking out the trash. This is one I always use, because if you think about, if I ask you to take out the trash, you probably know exactly what to do, all of the steps to get completely to the end of that and finish it satisfactorily. If I ask my son to take out the trash, he has to first go to the trash can and pull it out, take the lid off. He has to pull the bag out. He has to pick up anything that fell. He has to tie it. He has to take it to the garage. And this is where we always trip up. He has to come back and put a bag in it, put the can back away, and then wash his hands. So I just said 9 steps that he has to remember to do to successfully complete that task. And when you don't have good planning, organization, and sequencing skills, that is too much to hold in your working memory and succeed. So we use a lot of routine checklists, just a little. These are the steps you need to do to take out the trash, and we post it close to the trash can. Now we're not asking him to have great executive functioning skills that he needs to have to totally succeed with one verbal command, which he's likely not able to do. Now I've given him the support and the structure and the tools to be able to succeed at that task when I just say to him, take out the trash. I think that's one easy example that, we all have taken out the trash at some point, and we think of it as one task, but it's not. For our brains, it's a lot of tasks and a lot of things that we have to hold in our working memory and keep accessing as we go through completing that task. So when you're scheduling, when you're making these routine checklists, you're making these kind of lists of what the steps are to really, I'm sorry, my phone, I forgot to turn off. When we're making those lists for our kids, we need to involve them. We need to walk through the process of problem solving, of sequencing, of planning, of organizing. All of these things that we kind of take for granted if we ourselves have good executive functioning skills Our kids need to learn them through us. So something that you might not talk through out loud what you're doing, like taking out the trash, have your child do it with you. Talk out loud about the sequencing. Make a plan ahead of time. Okay, we're going to take out the trash. What steps are involved? What do you think we should do first? What do we need to start this task? And we take that for granted so easily. And I did for so many years because I have a super organized brain, that there are a lot of people who don't have that sort of neurological functioning. So bedtime routine, morning routine, any chores, they require often a checklist. And these can be really simple, handwritten, on a piece of paper that you stick on the wall. It could be a picture schedule if you have a child who's young or a child who isn't reading yet or who does better visually. Use pictures that you just print from the internet and put up. Something I did for a while for my son when he was younger, we took pictures of his room when it was actually my definition of clean. So when I say clean your room, these photos showed every area of his room to my standard of clean. So there was no longer a difference in interpretation of the instruction that I was giving. And that worked really well. But clean your room didn't work well. Or, pick up the clothes on the floor even doesn't work all that well. They need to see kind of what is the end point. So maybe there's a picture of the trash can with a fresh, clean bag in its spot on that checklist of steps. These are all good things to really take away some of the taxing of their executive functioning and helping them, again, kind of work around having lagging skills in those areas. My own son did the brief for executive functioning, which is the questionnaire evaluation. And for organization skills, when she plotted it on the graph, his organization was literally the very top line. It was almost off the chart bad. He's almost 18. It hasn't really improved. So we look at what systems, what tools, what supports can we put in place to help with that, because he's not just going to wake up one day and have this great organizational skill and not struggle with it anymore. So you'll find that some executive functioning skills can really be improved and skills really built, and some you're just really going to have to find tools and strategies and workarounds. We talked about modeling the process out loud. One thing I learned early, I used to just run around the house and pick up after my kids because it was easier, it was quicker, right? Instead of asking them 100 times and it still didn't get done, I could just grab it and do it. And I figured out that I was not teaching them how to do these things. I wasn't helping with the skills, and I was kind of resentful some of the time, and I wasn't giving them any step toward independence and living on their own and doing these things on their own. And so I had to really step back and say, okay, I'm not picking up the shoes in the middle of the kitchen floor. I'm going to call him in, and I'm not even going to tell him what to do with them. I'm going to ask him where they should be, because they need that practice of thinking these things through. They have to practice thinking about, oh, the shoes are in the middle of the kitchen floor. I'm pretty sure that's not exactly the best place for them, and knowing what to do with them, because then they're thinking through an organization process by figuring that out. Whereas if I just pick up the shoes and put them away in the closet, have they learned anything whatsoever? No. It's not just a matter of consequence. Oh, you put your shoes in the kitchen, that's not where they go. I'm upset with you or frustrated with you. It's a matter of really building these skills, and even, building new neural connections in these areas of the brain, because our brains are always changing. We're always forming new connections. Connections we're not using are dying off. So, you can always really start to implement these things and see even physiological changes for your kids as they start to use these skills, or even follow you while you use the skills as you're modeling that for them. For Time blindness, time management. This was a huge struggle for us. And I always tell this story because it easily identifies and really illustrates for you how simple one little tool can be to help our kids with this. My son has had a chore of emptying the dishwasher and putting those dishes away for years, and he's always hated it. He's always bristled against it. He fights me. I don't want to do it. It's going to take the rest of the day. I want to be with my friend, you know, a million excuses. And one night, standing in the kitchen, I realized that we had been going back and forth about whether or not he was going to empty the dishwasher for 30 minutes. 30. And I knew it only took 5 minutes. And we had already argued for 30 minutes. And I said to him, you know, you could have done this 10 times in the amount of time that you've been arguing. Went right over his head. He had no idea what I was really saying. You know, he didn't internalize time in that way. And so I decided I was going to challenge him by setting a timer. I said, I will prove to you that it only takes 5 minutes and you'll feel what 5 minutes feels like. I'll set the timer for 5 minutes and I'm going to finish whatever you didn't get done. Because he was certain that it took, you know, an hour, 2 hours. And so the timer, when it was at 4 minutes and 57 seconds when he finished, completely finished. And I practically had to peel him off the floor. He was stunned. And to me, that's crazy that he didn't really get that concept of a short amount of time or even a longer amount of time. It was just phenomenal. And it's been probably 3 or 4 years since then. He rarely fights against doing it now because he knows he can just get it done faster than fighting about it or resisting it. So any time that our kids are really feeling like, this happens a lot of time with homework. I don't want to do my math yet. It's going to take forever. You know, give them a timer, give them that visual. And I'm going to show you a few products, some tools at the end that you could possibly use, some that we've used and really like that help with these sort of things. Analog clocks. Every expert in time management and time blindness says have analog clocks around your house. So the clock with the face and the 2 hands on it, which most of us haven't had for years, but it helps them to visualize time, where just digital numbers like are on our stoves or our microwaves are really ambiguous when you think about it. They just keep changing, but it doesn't really represent kind of a passage of time visually. So that's a really big one. And then work on estimating time and challenging it, which is what I just illustrated with that dishwasher story. And I'm going to show you time timer and the time tracker timer as well. At the end, I'll share my screen again and show you some of those things, but that's what we typically have used. Working on priorities is also a really helpful process for kids with executive functioning delays, because usually it's really hard for them to prioritize. It might even be hard for them to sequence in the first place. Then we're asking them, once we sequence something, do we need to move it around? Do we even have it in the right sequence? And you know, that's a really deep process to learn. So you can just sit down with them and make priorities, sit down and really walk through things. If they have a school project and it's a lot of different steps in it, sit down, map out the different steps, and then talk about what should be first. What do we have to do before we can do some of these other tasks, or what's most important? There's a company called Knock Knock who makes these pads of paper with different charts and form fields and stuff on them. I'm going to show you a couple, but there's one just for prioritizing called Today's Plan of Attack. And there's also one on making a decision. They have many, probably 30 or 40 at this point, but they're already kind of giving a guideline for older kids and young adults as to how to formulate what they prioritize, how to make a decision about something. It gives them all that questioning and the different cues and stuff to fill out so that they are really learning that process, but they also have this structure that's really helping with it too. For emotional awareness and communication, I like programs like the Incredible 5-Point Scale, or the zones of regulation. Many of you have probably heard of one of both of those. And there's also a program out of Yale that I've just started learning about called the Ruler, I believe it is. And it's more of a spectrum of color and being able to tell where you are. It really helps with kind of getting those nuances of anger, nuances of sadness. And those programs, you can easily find online on Amazon. A lot of occupational therapists work through some of those when your kid is an OT to work on emotional awareness and communication, but they're visual. So it helps your child to be able to identify maybe how they're feeling when they can't do that with words, when they don't have that skill. And then that gives you kind of that open door to start talking about what that feels like, what they might do to express that particular feeling, what's appropriate, and then how to regulate it. That's a big piece of the zones of regulation program, is we're not just identifying the feelings, but we're talking about, okay, what different strategies can help your child regulate when they're in different zones. Maybe a weighted blanket if they're anxious, or a calming jar, the shake up jars with the glitter. There's so many different things that you can use, and they're all different based on your child. For my child, a weighted blanket is really helpful. For yours, they might hate it. It might be painful. So it depends on kind of sensory profile and a lot of other different things that are happening within their nervous systems. There's also a lot of games that improve executive functioning skills. This is a good way to really reach our kids because they're so into games, especially digital technology and video games and stuff like that. And, not all video games are bad. A lot of them do really teach problem solving, executive functioning, time management, social skills. So some board games that are really good for executive functioning skills are Jenga, Mind Trap, Quiddler, Pictionary, and chess. And those are kind of at different age levels too. I try to give you one or two in kind of each age bracket. Then video games. Minecraft is the biggest one that really helps with executive functioning skills. Also the Sandbox, Brain Rush, Two Dots, Gone Home, Pocket Frogs, and Ticket to Ride. There is a website called, I'm going to blank on it now, Learning Works for Kids, learningworksforkids.com. You can go in there and search for games based on the skill you're trying to build. You can go in and search particular games that your child is interested in to see what sort of skill building they can get from them. They have guides on that website to help you take like Minecraft and what your child is doing there and make sure that you're translating those skills into real life. You're helping kind of bridge that gap. They even have an online executive functioning program, like a class once a week for kids now as well. That's really helpful. I know the psychologist, Randy Coleman, who started it, and he's amazing. He just said, all these kids are coming in and this is what they're interested in. This is all they talk about. So I need to relate to them on what they're interested in. And he just started building this database and looking at these games and seeing what was really helpful with skill building and what really was more of just a video game for entertainment's sake. So I want to share some images of some of these tools because I'm very visual and I find that it's a lot more helpful. And then we can open up to questions. Give me one moment to share my screen again. This is the actual, well, it's an illustration of the actual morning routine chart that, we use for my son. He was, I would say, about eight years old when we used this. And it's illustrated because it was in one of my books, and we've lost the card long ago. But I just took a 4x6 and I typed it up, I cut it out. I got one of those laminating pockets. You can buy them at like Target and Walmart. And you just slide the paper in and peel it off and stick it down. So now it was pretty durable. And he walked around the house with it each morning and he slid that paper clip that you can see there, he just slid it down to whatever he was on. And so he could follow the list really easily. He could carry it because, you know, he started upstairs, but he had to come downstairs for breakfast. And then he got a reward at the end because electronics were big for him and completely prohibited before school, before we came up with this checklist. This was something that really worked. It was one of the few of these kind of reward systems that actually worked for us because we tried a million. And his name is Ricochet on there because that's the pseudonym I give him when I write about him, is not his given name. People ask me all the time why I would be that cruel. Like, I wasn't. Anyhow, example of a family calendar. We always used a Post-it calendar because I could quickly pull something off and move it, or I could quickly pull it off and throw it out and put something new up. And the kids, when they were really little, enjoyed kind of moving the Post-its and having, you know, it was just something else tangible in their hands while they helped with it. This example also has files for everybody in the house. You can do whatever works for you, but I just wanted you to see kind of that everybody has their row and that it's really easy for our kids to come and look at. And again, if you have a kid that needs the visuals or does better with the visuals, print some of those online and cut them out and use them in your calendar as well. This is the time timer. And they have lots of products now. You can get an app on a phone or iPad. You can get these physical timers. You can get a watch now that has this timer. But the beauty of the time timer is that that red disc is set to how long the timer is set for. And that red disc disappears at the same rate that the time disappears. So it's very, very visual for kids to follow how much time they have. And when it goes off, there is an audible ding or buzzer, but you can turn that off for kids who don't like that audible at the end. My son was refusing to use timers for years, and I couldn't figure out why. And it turned out that it startled him when it went off, and that was why he didn't want to use it. It wasn't that it was you know, stressful or anything like that. It was completely that sensory piece. This is the Stoplight time tracker, which is great also visually because it kind of gives them these zones of how much time they have left. This is that knock knock pad of how to prioritize. So it gives you already these different buckets to kind of put things into. These are critical things I have to do. These things would be nice if I got them today. And these are the things I know I need to do, but there's not a chance in the world I'm going to do them today. It gives you all those different options. So it's really giving that structure for pulling out what, you know, how you need to think about your different tasks in order to prioritize them. They have a bunch of really great ones. This is the incredible 5-point scale book that I mentioned as far as emotional regulation. I think a lot of our schools in our area are using this system at school. And again, it's somewhat visual. It's easy to kind of do a check-in with your child and say, well, where are you? Are you a 4 angry or are you a 5 angry? How, you know, let's really dig into it and help you figure out where you are so we can figure out what's going to help you regulate. And then the zones of regulation. This is their poster, which we had at home. And I loved it because we could list, it's dry erase, and we could list the things that helped when he was in the blue zone, the things that helped, you know, when he was in a red zone. We could put his weighted blanket on it. We could put, you know, hanging out with the dog and petting the dog, whatever it was. So there's so many tools, but those are tools that we have found really helpful as far as helping with executive functioning. But again, structure and routine, if you're going to start in one place, that's the start. That's the best place to do the most good from doing one thing in your household. So that's what I have, and I would love to take questions and talk about other things. I know that we had some questions about independence as well, and maybe some specific questions in some different areas will help too. But really, all of the stuff that I've talked about is helping to take our kids closer to independence, especially when we're walking through problem solving with them. We're asking them to think through where things go, where your belongings should live. That's really what it takes to shift them to a place where they can do these things on their own successfully. Anybody have questions? I just threw a ton at you all at once. I know. Be very real. We still struggle too. You know, we have a child with neuro differences, and so there are going to be some challenges. The trick really is you have to catch it before you get to that point. You have to start really having an awareness and watching. And when you see that he's headed toward the red zone, you're trying to get him to interact or use some of these calming tools at that point. Once your child is overwhelmed by emotion, their frontal lobe goes offline. Physiologically, when they're in meltdown or they're super flooded with emotions, the amygdala cuts off the frontal lobe. And this was a huge aha for me that I only learned a few years ago. I'm a rationalizer. I want to help you. I want to talk you through it, and we're going to get to the end and everybody's going to be hunky-dory and we're going to do it really quick. That's my own personality, and it never worked. Never, never, ever worked. And I had to realize that once he was all the way in that emotional state, completely flooded by it, he could not use any tools. He could not process what I was saying to him. He had to have some time to really get through it. Some people like to create a calming zone in their house. So if your child has 2 or 3 things that are typically calming for them, when things start to go a little off the rails, or you're starting to notice that they're heading in that direction, you can really say, oh, you know, I think it's time maybe that you go to your calming spot, or why don't you head in there for a few minutes and see if that helps you to kind of feel better, you know, whatever language is appropriate for the age of your child or the developmental level of your child. But the trick really to resolving meltdowns, resolving these really intense outbursts and things like that, is to see them coming earlier and intervene earlier. Because once they're there, neurologically, they're not even available to work through it. And then you go back later, you know, when that does happen, you go back later and you say, wow, you know, you were really deep in the red zone earlier. You were so angry and I really couldn't help you then. And it didn't seem like you were able to help yourself. So what can we do next time? What should we do next time you're feeling like that? Things like come and tell mom, ask for help, go to my calm spot, get my weighted blanket, you know, and consistently having those conversations, it becomes a little easier for them to access the fact that those tools are there in their mind and to start trying to reach for them themselves. It's definitely a process and it takes a really long time. You will certainly feel like a broken record. You'll feel like you've told him or her a million times that he should use his weighted blanket when he's upset. But that's what it takes. We have to build habits where there's a lack of executive functioning skill. When there's a habit, I no longer have to process and use my skills. I'm just doing it. And that's what those routine checklists will do too. They'll start to create habits that then we see later on taking the place of having to really lean on executive functioning and those kind of skills. That is so tough. And it really depends on that other person. How open and willing are they to even take an approach that's outside of their norm? Are they going to be open to doing something out of the box? And that can be really difficult. You know, we have different public perceptions in our culture that are really hard to push against and challenged sometimes. So, there's always going to be, I think, some level of training that you will have to do with other people, whether it be, read this book, or here's a list of what helps in these certain situations. What I've always found best is to start the conversation with, I know you want to help this child or this adult as much as I do. And what I have found to really be helpful in these situations is blank. So, I know you want to help my daughter really succeed in getting her tasks done on time at work, maybe. Here's what we've found is really helpful to, to help her with the structure maybe that you'll provide her with, or the reminder. And so that's going to then work out good for them too. You kind of have to remind them that our focus, all of us, our focus is that individual who's struggling, and how can we help them? Because by helping them, you're also helping yourself in situations like that. If you learn how to best help my child at baseball practice, guess what? You're going to have a better experience at baseball practice with him, right? But if you're pushing him to do things, or you're not understanding the ways that his brain works, or his lack of focus, then he's going to get ramped up and things are not going to turn out the way you want them. So really kind of almost navigating how you want them to see, framing that in a way that they see that it really is more about helping that person rather than about you having control of the situation. A lot of times in our interactions with teachers, they feel like I'm trying to dictate how to teach a classroom of kids, and I'm not. What I'm trying to do is to communicate what I know would be helpful to my kid, because I spend all these hours every day and all of these years up to that point with him. And so when you frame it in that way, starting out, it tends to be better received on the other end of it. That is really a challenge. There are a lot of families who have family members, grandparents, aunts and uncles who absolutely refuse to even accept the diagnosis, or accept that your child isn't aggressive or lazy or emotional. And until somebody is open to changing their minds about those things, no amount of trying to teach them is maybe going to help. It's really difficult when they're just not willing to change the way they think about something. So you have to find a balance and really figure out how to frame something from the start with that person. And you have to kind of be really aware of your interaction with that person, how they respond to different things, which can be hard if this is somebody that you don't have interaction with a lot or ever. But it's tough. That's a really, really tough question. And I think we all struggle with it. And I think we all struggle with it quite a lot. And it's something that you just learn.
I would jump in here and say, if there are certain situations like work, or if she has people that she sees regularly, having some sort of, it's almost like a crib notes card of triggers that can occur, and it's almost like an if then, like these are the things that could trigger either a shutdown or an explosive behavior, or whatever it is that is interfering with her ability to integrate into the, you can help people understand what some triggers are, and then maybe some tools to respond to that. Mm-hmm. And just start off with just some small suggestions. But if it's somebody who's going to be spending extensive time, then you can sort of build on that.
I think it's good to define expectations too. If you're talking about maybe your daughter in a job or at work, making sure that her superiors know where the expectations are doable for her and can be succeeded at, and where they are just too high for her to meet the demand, can be really helpful too. Because we see a lot of kind of breakdown and emotionality and intensity when our expectations or teacher expectations or the coach or the coworker are out of reach of our kids, if they cannot succeed, they are going to have a really hard time, as you and I would. And when they lack skills to manage that, to manage those feelings when that happens, it gets really tough. I mean, we could talk for days and not cover it all. And it's very individualized too, and what someone struggles with and what interventions are going to be useful or not. So there's a lot of work on our parts as parents to discern what's right for our kids in any given situation or expectation or skill building or tool or strategy to work around. There's so many variables. You guys are awesome for showing up. You're showing up for your kids by trying to learn more and be more helpful. And I have much respect for that and for everybody, because just showing up is the first part of it.